Hey all, today we will look closely at the technology presented in one of the most realistic sci-fi shows ever produced, The Expanse. In the ever-expanding realm of science fiction, this show stands out as a titan, pushing the edge of realism as we know it in entertainment. Within the immersive plot and excellent storytelling lies some of the best depictions of future technologies I have ever seen. Although there are certainly more speculative aspects of the show, such as the alien life form known as the protomolecule, I believe there is a lot to be learned about the fascinating technologies the show demonstrates. To make this video more digestible, I will be breaking the technologies into three categories: advanced propulsion, life in space, and space warfare. In most science fiction media, fusion is practically a synonym for magic. Fortunately, The Expanse takes the hard approach of portraying nuclear fusion realistically. Nuclear fusion is essentially forcing two hydrogen isotopes into each other at a very high temperature and pressure in order to create helium, and in that process, lots of energy is released. This happens naturally in the cores of every star. However, we have found several ways to replicate it here on Earth. The most successful type of reactor to date is an inertial confinement reactor. This type of reactor shoots multiple high-powered lasers for a split second at a small fuel pellet to heat it enough to undergo nuclear fusion in a small chamber. After almost 80 years of trying to make fusion energy viable, there have recently been two successful fusion ignitions at the Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory. This means that the initial reaction produced a higher yield of energy than the amount of energy used to start the reaction. But what does fusion have to do with propulsion? The main use for fusion in the show is to power spacecraft engines. The name given to these hyper-efficient engines in the show is the Epstein drive. This engine uses magnetic coils to direct the high-velocity products of fusion into the exhaust from chemical fuel, essentially creating an afterburner on steroids. While all of this is theoretically possible, and several real engine types have been designed, we are not very close to being able to make these engines a reality at the present. A British startup has recently been in the news for designing a fusion engine, and the company is now starting to try and make a prototype, even though there are no viable fusion reactors yet, let alone ones that would fit in a spacecraft. An issue in real life that both fighter pilots and astronauts face is G-lock, which happens as a result of a lack of blood reaching the brain due to high G maneuvers. The first effect is a loss of consciousness, which happens to pilots wearing a G suit at just above 9 Gs. However, if this is sustained for more than just a few seconds, major brain damage starts to happen and can quickly kill pilots. In the show, there are maneuvers made that exceed 15 Gs for extended periods of time. The solution that is showcased is a mixture of blood thinners and drugs called the juice, which allows pilots to sustain high G maneuvers for extended periods of time. While this may seem far-fetched, this is a very possible technology that could potentially work in real life. The blood thinners would stop blood clotting at high Gs, increase the amount of blood flow to the brain, while the other drugs would keep brain function sharp by using a stimulant drug. Another clever solution the show comes up with is using secondary thrusters to land spacecraft on planets. In the show, a spacecraft wouldn't be able to land using its main thrusters, as the heat from the engines would melt the ship as it descends, because the surrounding air is a lot more conductive than the vacuum of space. While this is not a problem for humans just yet, as soon as we have interplanetary capable thrusters, we wouldn't be able to land the ships using them, because fusion engines burn several magnitudes hotter than chemical engines. While spacecraft are certainly the heart of the show, a lot of thought goes into the designs of space stations and other habitats in space. The ring stations serve the important purpose of generating the feeling of gravity, which would stop bone density and muscle tissue loss in space. However, they would be very expensive to create.
This is because the ring needs to be large enough where the force at your head and your feet are roughly the same, and this quickly makes the minimum radius of the station quite large. While this is a slightly far-fetched idea that is 100% possible, but not very practical, the show has another type of habitat that is very realistic. And that would be colonizing asteroids and turning them into space stations. It would be a much easier task, as most of the materials needed will already be in orbit, such as metals and water, which would save lots of money on both fuel and resources. Of course, the correct asteroid would need to be selected, but seeing as there are more than 1 million asteroids larger than 1 kilometer in the belt, there are surely several that could be viable space stations. It is impossible to not mention space warfare when talking about the Expanse, as it is such a large part of the show. While most of the weapons in the Expanse aren't very groundbreaking, there is one detail that I have not seen in any other show, and is the reason why I think the Expanse is the most realistic sci-fi show. PDCs are one of the weapons in the show, and are essentially glorified machine guns. If you look closely, you can see a small rocket engine on the back of each PDC. While this may not look like much, this is absolutely necessary, and no other show has thought about it. The rocket engine solves a problem that Newton's third law creates. Every action has an equal and opposite reaction. If there was no small thruster there, the ship would be thrown all over the place by gunfire. However, the rockets equalize the acceleration caused by the PDCs, so the spaceship is stabilized and effective. Thanks for watching. I hope you both enjoyed and learned something from the video. If you want to see another, consider subscribing, as these videos take a lot of time and effort to make. See you all in the next one.